Bitcoin is the only FU money, right? And actually, without Bitcoin, you can never have FU money. An amount of wealth so big that you can basically do whatever you want. You can say what you want. Total freedom. I think he was one of the first guys that kind of like looked at this whole thing of inflation as being like a direct violation of property rights, and that every time a king did such a thing, the citizen had the right to cut the king's head. At the end of the day, money is a tool, right? It's not the end goal. Fortunately, what I think fiat money does to our brains as well is that kind of like reinforces this idea that money is the end goal rather than a tool. It gets more and more difficult to do any kind of attack on Bitcoin, and you need to take into account as well the fact that if you fail to do that, Bitcoin will become even stronger. Whatever actions put more monies in people's pockets, the better at the end of the day.
What are you doing in Bitcoin, and like kind of what excites you the most in Bitcoin?
So in a nutshell, right now I work in a new Bitcoin mining pool called Demand. It's a Stratum V2. I can give you my history, my background in a nutshell. I've studied economics and finance, so here in Portugal. Basically, I learned a lot of that Keynesian crap. So that inflation was good, that you needed in order for the economy to work, all that kind of stuff. And back in 2020, so the first time that I heard about Bitcoin was actually back in 2017. Back then, I was working on a financial brokerage firm, and basically, we had a lot of clients asking us like, how does this work? Why is Bitcoin like rising? Actually, I think back then, 2017 was so not the previous bull market, the one before the last one. So we had a lot of clients that wanted to know and wanted to understand what was going on with Bitcoin. But back then, of course, I didn't have the knowledge that I have today. So I was just like, what's the use case of this? What's the issue? What's the problem that this is solving? Because I think that's the main reason why people cannot figure it out or cannot understand why Bitcoin is important, why it plays a role, right? Because it's a solution for a problem that most people don't know that they have. And yeah, back then I had a bank account, everything worked fine. Like I said, I studied in university that inflation was necessary in order to have a healthy economy. So yeah, never. I just didn't care about it. I remember I did some research in order to once again clarify my clients' doubts, but yeah, just didn't look very into it. And so yeah, this was 2020. I was working in financial, basically an investment bank here in Portugal. And one of the guys that I was working with, there was one day that he came and he was like, guys, you have to check this out. Bitcoin is going to change the world. And once I hear that, I was like, all right, I need to give this another try. I need to study this better. So I decided, all right, I'm gonna read a book about it, and I ordered the Bitcoin Standard. And I remember that yeah, I was reading it, and it all started like clicking in my head, because during my university days, I kind of like had some neo moments per se, where I kind of like felt that everything that I was being taught was kind of like a lie in a sense, or very superficial in a sense, because I remember when I was like 16, 17, my family has a small business, and I remember my dad used to he used to do like these types of experiments, kind of like a research and development, let's say, program within a company. And he was doing like all these experiments with the goal of saving costs for the company, of course. And in my head, that would turn out into one of three things: either more profits for the company, more wages bigger wages for our workers, and lower prices for our final customers. So this whole thing about prices rising as time goes by didn't never kind of like clicked in my head. I remember as well, like during the lectures, like the professor talking about like potential GDP and like the natural unemployment rate, and these we're talking about abstract concepts. It's not something like like physics, right? Like a hard science that you can like you know that what you're talking about actually is happening in the real world. So I had a lot of these neo moments, and when I was reading the Bitcoin standard, it kind of like started clicking on me. I remember that it was during the war passage, so kind of like understanding that it's way much easier for governments to fund wars with fiat money. That I was like, all right, man, this is gonna change the game completely. This is gonna change the world, and I need to understand this better. And I felt like I had to play a role on it, on this transformation, on this revolution that is basically happening. So in a nutshell, I would say maybe quite a long introduction.
I love that, but it's one aspect I loved the most was when you talked about the economics being like almost like a fake science department, because I see like Satoshi put the science back into economics and put it like as a real thing in there. Before it was kind of like a pseudo science thing where people just trying to figure out what to do, and they all just made it worse over the time. And Satoshi kind of brought science and math and the real things back into economics. I like that approach.
Yeah, we always had like good economics, right? We're talking about Austrian economics, and even before them with the scholastics and forgot the name of the school, but yeah, there was a school that kind of like initiated this type of thought, but the Keynesian idea is actually just kind of like went mainstream after the Great Depression. Before then, uh, actually, um, there was no, let's say, Keynesian economics per se. So it was mainly the Austrian economic thought and like more liberalism economic thought that kind of like dominated back then. So yeah, it's not like we're living, of course. If those guys that lived back in the 19th century kind of like um, managed to come to 2025 and see what we are, I think they would go back into their into their sorry, I forgot the name of it. Maybe not into their graves, yeah, because they wouldn't manage to, they couldn't believe what they were seeing.
It's super interesting. Also, I just googled it next to it. I never heard about it. Is it the School of Salamanca?
Yeah, School of Salamanca. You have Juan de
That's a,
Mariana. I think he was one of the first guys that kind of like looked at this whole thing of inflation as being like a direct violation of property rights, and that every time a king did such a thing, the citizen had the right to cut the king's head. So yeah, so very different thoughts, let's say,
I
that
love
people
that.
had back then.
I can. It's like the long before Calmenga, scholars like Luis de Molino and Diego de Cover, Covarrubias, I don't know how to pronounce that name, argued that value is determined by individuals, not by intrinsic properties. That's like, it's really cool.
Yeah,
I never heard about the School of Salamanca. Why did I never heard about that?
yeah, that's basically the origin of the Austrian School of Economics. So this whole idea of like money being stable and something that no one can control. It's not something that came with the Austrians. So it has been present all history. And yeah, unfortunately, with Keynes and Keynes ideas, they kind of like disappeared, especially because of the role that academia plays in our society. Unfortunately, what happens is that anyone that wants to study economics, at least let's say in the major universities, the only thing that they are taught is Keynesian economics. So it's kind of like you have like you're only taught half of the story, right? And when you're 16 or 16, 17, 18, you don't have a very critical view of society. So you kind of just like look at the professor and you swallow everything that he says, and you never ask yourself, wait a second, is this correct? Is this like really correct? What my professor is saying? You just assume that because he's kind of like, I'm not going to say a god, but he's like the reference point for you, right? When you're 17, 18, you don't have any life experience. You're just absorbing everything that he says because you just assume that he's the one that kind of like owns the truth.
Interesting. Do you know why the Austrian School of Economics is kind of got more popularized around that, and the Salamanca one is like more in the background now? It's super interesting for me to hear
No,
that.
its principles are very similar. So I'm not an expert per se in economics history, but I know that, like I said, the Austrian thought is very inspired and based on what Salamanca School on Salamanca School's principles and their thoughts.
Probably also because it's more recent, like Manger and stuff like that. They came after that, and maybe that's why. Really interesting. Yeah, thank you for a really interesting introduction. I learned something new today, which gets more and more rare on a daily Bitcoin podcast with now 400
Yeah,
episodes.
the Bitcoin rabbit hole never ends, man. That's that's something that I've been learning. That's something that I've learned for these past years, and I
What
guess
is
you too.
yeah, like I've been complete, like I've I thought I understand Bitcoin well before I started the podcast. Now 14 months before I started this daily podcast, and I've interviewed now over 400 people on this podcast, and I learned so much. Like I got to know that I didn't knew anything before, and now I'm like every week I stumble onto a new topic, and like School of Salamanca, I never heard about that. Like it seems like it's a no brainer that I should know about it, but I never heard about it. So that's interesting. What I wanted to ask is like, what are some interesting rabbit holes that you are currently looking into in Bitcoin, or like that you stumbled upon like in 2024, 2025?
I mean, I would say definitely the Bitcoin mining per se. I mean, yeah, Bitcoin mining. So there's a lot of things that most people don't know about Bitcoin mining. For instance, I would say that actually the biggest concern that we have right now in Bitcoin, the biggest problem that we need to solve is the fact that miners are not the ones actually building the block templates. So probably already had a couple of guests that talked about this. But in a sense, what is happening right now in the Bitcoin network is that miners are kind of like more like employees of the pools than being like employees of the network directly. And that's of course a problem. That's an issue. And why is that the case? Because the major or one of the major value propositions of Bitcoin is being censorship resistant, right? You want to send your money and nobody can basically stop you, right? Even if there's like a miner that is censoring transactions, you know that for sure that the guy that mines it to the next block is going to include it. So even if you don't, if a transaction doesn't get included in the next block, you have to wait a little bit longer, but it's going to get included. It's going to get included in a few blocks. And why is this a big issue? Because in a sense, pools are the ones that have the power to select or to determine which transactions go into the block. So currently, there's like I don't know, 5, 6 pools that represent 85% of the total hash rate. So once again, if there's like, let's say, a government like the US government that wants to, I don't know, due to some reason, let's say that, yeah, they suspect that a certain address belongs to someone from Iran or North Korea or something like that. They can just basically force Foundry, which is the biggest pool right now, to say, all right, transactions from this address, you won't include them in your box in your blocks. And what happens is that for that person in particular, he will only have like 60% of the block space available for their transactions to get included. So yeah, I would say that's definitely something that, for what I've seen and for what I've been talking with other Bitcoiners, most people are not aware, and we need to solve that. And that's actually what I'm working on right now. I would say that besides the Bitcoin mining like rabbit hole, I've been digging into libertarian philosophy and libertarian books. So I've been reading. Actually, I'm reading The Ethics of Liberty by Murray Rothbard, and it's a really funny exercise to kind of like study on your own and try to figure out how a fully anarcho-capitalist system would work. So, and yeah, it's quite interesting to look into this, because, for instance, people assume, let's say, for instance, taxes and social security and all of that. You just assume that you have to pay your taxes, right? Because that's like the only way for you to help someone out. But what happens in the sense when you pay taxes is that you are outsourcing that responsibility of helping other people to the state. So we are social persons, right? We're social people. We like to belong to we like to belong to groups and be part of a community. So what ends up happening is that probably if you didn't have taxes, you kind of like felt that it's my duty to help others, right? So if I'm working and let's say that I provided value to the market, I've managed to produce wealth for myself or to accumulate wealth for myself. Since I did that, and there's someone that like next to me that I feel like needs help, probably I mean I cannot speak for everyone, right? But I would say that the vast majority of people would help that person. So what happens in a system where you have taxes, in where you basically have a government that is saying, all right, you just pay me and I take care of that responsibility in society, people in a sense end up being more selfish, because they're like, yeah, I have that responsibility, I have that duty to help someone else, but since I paid my taxes to the government, so now if you need help, you have to talk with the government because I already did my part. You know what I mean? So there's kind of like a disconnection between all members of society, regardless of you like being with having more wealth, less wealth, because the government kind of like steps in and inserts itself like between us. And what ends up happening as well is that the relationships between us are not as close as they should be. So that's another rabbit hole that I've been digging, that I find very, very interesting as well.
I partnered up with Coin Vigilante. This is the most beautiful Bitcoin timepiece that I ever saw created by anyone. Look at that beauty. I love it so much. Coin Vigilante made a perfect Bitcoin watch. That's the perfect, subtle, elegant way to go out there and show that you are a Bitcoiner. And that watch brand is Bitcoin only. And Coin Vigilante just dropped a completely new and amazing Genesis edition of their watch collections. You have the date of the first ever mined Bitcoin block in there, and of course also the block height and which epoch we are currently in. I love the level of detail they put in this masterpiece, and make sure to check out those amazing Coin Vigilante timepieces down in the descriptions. I love those watches so much. If you watch or listen to my podcast on a regular basis, I'll guess you already bought some Bitcoin. And now the most important step is to keep the Bitcoin. Keep them secure in a hardware wallet. My personal recommendation for hardware wallet is the BitBox. It's super secure. It's simple to set up. It's also a perfect gift for a friend who has still their Bitcoin on an exchange. And you can get a 5% discount with the code Robin at the checkout. Visit bitbox.swiss/Robin to get your BitBox. And the next step is to really level up your sovereignty as an individual. You have to have the most secure self-custody setup. You have to secure your own devices. You have to protect your privacy. You have to set up an inheritance plan. And depending on where you live, you even want to have a plan B, a citizenship where you can move in case something goes really wrong. And through all those steps, the Bitcoin way is guiding you through step by step. And if you visit thebitcoinway.com/partners/Robin, you even get a 30-minute free call to find out how you can level up your sovereignty. That's super interesting. The thought of when there's a bigger government, the individual relationships are more unstable and smaller, and because people are already like, okay, like I have the police, I pay for social insurance, I pay for all the hospitals with my taxes. So if someone falls down and I want to help them, it's like, yeah, like let's call police, like let them deal with that kind of a thing.
Exactly. So basically what you're doing when you're paying taxes is that you are outsourcing like your personal responsibilities that should belong to you. And when that happens, of course, then social relationships in society will not be as strong as they would be. You can say the same thing, for instance, about the family per se, because what happens right now is that with the pension system that pretty much every Western government has implemented right now. What happens is that, all right, you basically get a retirement. You get a wage for your retirement, right? It's guaranteed. So actually, can't remember the exact word right now, but when you retire, you get a payment from the government, right?
I like the pension.
Pension. Yeah, thanks. So what happens is that actually what would happen without a government is that you had to have kids, right? Because if you didn't, during the last days of your life, you wouldn't have anyone. I mean, you would have friends, right? But possibly you wouldn't have like someone that would be like close by that could help you, on a daily basis. So that wasn't one of the reasons why you had kids as well. So, but once the government steps in, is just saying, all right, never mind about that. We'll just pay you a pension in the future, regardless of what happens. But of course, that if this is the case, you're going to be less motivated to have kids, right? Because if you can get that help in the future, regardless of producing, in this case, the human capital that is resources that is necessary in order to provide that help in the future, people are just less incentivized to have kids, and then in the end of the day, fertility rate goes down, and society as a whole, society as a whole collapses, because without any people, right, society will of course go down.
Yeah, there's no society without people. Like that's true.
Exactly.
And it's super interesting. I also never thought about the government's helping elderly people gives an incentive for less kids, and we have seen this steady decline of fertility rates where people get less and less kids. I mean, we only have to look at, like, my grandma got 6 kids, my mom got only 2 kids. I currently have 0 kids, but I intend to have a lot of kids. But like that's a super interesting thought of, like, we see that we get less and less kids, but in fact we actually need to have more kids to keep that whole system. Like, without that, we get extinct at some point.
Another thing that explains this phenomenon is, of course, the whole time preference thing, right? I'm pretty sure that you're familiar with that concept. So fiat money, in a way. So we already have a positive time preference, right? That's something that the Keynesians also don't understand, right? Because if your time preference is positive, assuming that you're a mortal being, that you know that you're gonna die, your capability of taking advantage of all the wealth that you accumulate as life goes by diminishes, right? As you get closer to death. So of course that you are well incentivized, you are more than incentivized to consume today compared to tomorrow. And of course that you can also throw in the fact that you cannot you don't have 100% assurances that you're going to be here tomorrow. So of course that everyone is going to prefer to consume today versus tomorrow, right? So there's no need for money to get inflated away in order for people to want to consume right now, right? Because that's that. Probably already heard that deflation FUD, where people are like, okay, so if people stop consuming, the economy will basically collapse because aggregate demand will just shrink, and then basically companies will make less money, and will make less money. They will hire less people, and if less people have a job, consumption will diminish again, and then you have this virtual cycle. But what happens is that it's not what is happening right now is the consumption level of the economy is like overextended beyond what would happen in a natural free economy, and people just think that this overextended level is like the natural rate of consumption in the economy. You know what I mean? So the reference point is like biased towards the right. What the big issue with deflation? It's not consumption. It's the fact that we have an over leverage system, of course. And when the economy is based on debt, of course, that you need money to lose value as time goes by for it to be sustainable. Otherwise, everything collapses. So it has nothing to do with consumption. So I don't know if I if I was clear. It's kind of hard to explain all these thoughts and all these things in a foreign language.
Yeah, but you're doing good. I at least understand it very well. I hope the viewers also. That's super interesting. The all the aspects of, like, bigger governments, time preference, then the fertility rate of that, the spending behavior, and yeah, like, obviously, like, it's such. I hear actually that argument from people of, like, oh, but if the money is hard, nobody spends. I'm like, of course people spend, like like I'm all in Bitcoin. I only do Bitcoin. I of course receive payments also in fiat, but actually most of my income is already in Bitcoin. I try to spend Bitcoin as much as I can. I have to spend Bitcoin because most of my income is is in Bitcoin. And still I spend money. Like, I buy lights for my studio. I buy food for my home. I travel. I live life because, like, what do I have from a lot of Bitcoin if I never use them and just die? Like, obviously exactly. I can give them my kids and stuff like that. But every person has a positive time preference. But if we can lower it, it makes quality of life actually better and not worse. And this is a really hard concept for people to understand, of like, okay, you spend less, you value the future more, but you have a better life now. I truly believe that that's the case. At least that's what was the case for me once I started lowering my time preference and doing that. It's a foreign concept to a lot of economists, unfortunately.
Yeah. At the end of the day, money is a tool, right? It's not the end goal. And unfortunately, what I think fiat money does to our brains as well is that it kind of like reinforces this idea that money is the end goal rather than a tool. Because what ends up happening, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of FU money. So like
What
it's
money?
FU money, a level of
Oh
FU money,
yeah,
fuck your money.
FU money. Yeah, I didn't. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I would make the argument that Bitcoin is the only FU money, right? And actually, without Bitcoin, you can never have FU money, because the idea of fuck you money, or I mean, I'm saying FU money, but we can swear in this podcast, right?
Absolutely.
So the whole idea of fuck you money, for those that are not familiar with this concept, is an amount of wealth so big that you can basically do whatever you want. You can say what you want. You can, yeah, total freedom, that total absolute freedom. But why do I make an argument that on a fiat regime you can never have FU money? Because on inflationary regime, the cost of living keeps going up. So even if you have, let's say that you are someone that started a company and you were like super successful, you sold it for like 10 million euros or $10 million. Now you have that money on your bank account. On an inflationary regime, you can never rest assured that that money is going to be enough for your life or for your kids. Why? Because you look around and, for instance, you go to I don't know, Lisbon, let's say the Portuguese capital, or Berlin or Paris or any city, whatever, whenever in the world, wherever in the world, sorry. And what you see is that, for instance, house prices keep increasing 10% every year. So you can never be 100% sure that the 10 million that you have in your bank account is going to be enough in order to basically buy a house or to provide for your children. Let's say that your children, you want to give them, you want to offer them a house when he or she turns 18. If you look around and everything is rising 10 by 10%, you're like, is my 10 million, are my 10 million going to be enough? Right? It's like fiat, the inflation, like they, what it does to your brain is like it keeps inserting this question in your head. You never have like true peace of mind that true FU money would bring or should bring. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's kind of like the true strength of maybe one example of even my life. That podcast would probably not existed if I haven't started saving in Bitcoin, because I was in a fiat job and I was like, I don't know if I want to do a Bitcoin podcast, and I'm like a all in or nothing guy, so I wouldn't I wouldn't done the podcast just on a side project. But because I saw in the first 1-2 months a little bit of a result, I was like, okay, let's go all in this Bitcoin podcast thing. I was like, I had 500 subscribers. Like I had no success. I had no money. I had no sponsorship contracts. I had no contacts in Bitcoin. I just like, let's jump into it. And I only took that decision out of courage. And the courage came mostly from having Bitcoin savings, because I was like, okay, I can live off Bitcoin for 1-2 years, maybe, depending on how the price goes. But I can live off my Bitcoin savings for a little while. And I was prepared to live off my Bitcoin savings. Luckily, I never had to do that. I always had a positive cash flow each month. But because Bitcoin gave me that financial security, and the savings of Bitcoin gave me the financial security, I could take a brave decision and follow more of my what I really wanted to do, even though my job before, and that was the hurdle rate of like my job before, I liked it. It was not a bad job. Nobody was bad to me. Like it was a good environment, good thing. It was IT security, but I just wanted to have this basically a similar thing, but in Bitcoin. And because of the Bitcoin, I could actually do that. And I think that's where it also comes in the decision making.
I think that's what a lot of Bitcoiners feel as well, is that once you start positioning yourself on a Bitcoin standard, you kind of like know that your financial future is secure, right? And if your financial future is secured, if your financial wealth per se is you have it like guaranteed, you know that you have more control over your time, right? And in a sense, that's what this is all about. In the end of the day, once again, money is a tool, is not the end goal. So I think the best thing that Bitcoin can give us in the end of the day is, of course, the freedom to pursue our dreams and everything that we want to do with our lives. Yeah, I would say that that's the case.
Absolutely, that's the most important thing of Bitcoin. But the thing that we from the starting actually wanted to talk about is how we can make Bitcoin more decentralized, and what you're working on with Stratum. I'm really looking forward to what you. I unfortunately didn't have time to read the paper that you sent to me today, but I'm really looking forward to like what you're working on there.
So basically, like I said, we have this issue in Bitcoin right now. So block templates are being created by the pools, not by the miners. Of course, this goes completely against what Satoshi envisioned back in 2010 when he was talking on the forums. So once again, one of the major value propositions of Bitcoin is being censorship resistant, and we cannot guarantee that if we have 6 or 7 players deciding what goes in those blocks. So the innovation that Stratum V2 brings. So just to clarify for everyone that is not familiar with these mining concepts, there has been several mining protocols. Several mining protocols were used by miners across Bitcoin's history. And the one that is being used right now, or that is mostly commonly used, is Stratum V2, Stratum V1, sorry. And on Stratum V1, the Stratum V1 protocol doesn't allow for miners to create the block templates and basically to build the blocks and to choose whatever transactions they want to put in them. And Stratum V2, I think it started being developed back in 2021 by the Brains guys, together with Matt Corello, a Bitcoin Core developer. And it solves a lot of issues, but the main one is this issue with block template creation. So basically, with Stratum V2, miners have the option of running a node and basically on their own terms build the blocks and select the transactions that they want to add to it. That's something else that I actually didn't know, and most people are not aware, that most miners right now, they don't run nodes. So they just have a connection straight to the pool, right? And once again, that's why I was saying that in today's configuration, miners are kind of like more like an employee of the pool rather than employee of the network, as which is probably something that most people are not aware of. So yeah, Stratum V2 fixes this issue. Other issues that it fixes, for instance, empty blocks. I don't know, probably you already seen, right? Sometimes there's blocks that are mined without transaction fees. That's due to a technicality that basically Stratum V2 works. I think it's not appropriate to go into technical details, right? But it fixes that. SV2 is encrypted as well, so it prevents any man in the middle attacks. A man-in-the-middle attack is basically someone hijacking your hash rate, so they could like steal your shares, like your work. So the miner submits shares, submits work to the pool, and what can happen on this Stratum V2, let's say, framework right now is that someone can come in and basically steal a portion of your shares without being noticed. So yeah, that's something that affects miners' profitability, and that's something that Stratum V2 works as well. In terms of other features, it consumes less CPU, less bandwidth, so miners end up with less stalled shares. So yeah, in a nutshell, overall, I think this is it. I don't know if, yeah, I threw in like some mining like concepts that probably are not very well known amongst everyone in the Bitcoin community. I don't know if you want me to dig a little bit deeper into them or.
Yeah, it's for me. It's also interesting to know like how deep on certain parts the knowledge of the viewers are, and I always try to make it really beginner friendly. So like even if someone just comes around, they kind of can consume it. But with those mining topics, it's hard because there are many concepts in there that are like not like we talk a lot about where Bitcoin's future is going, the adoption, like the economic sides of it, also in economics. We also talk a lot about, but I think mining, the technicalities of those, it just doesn't get as much as attention, I feel like. And that's why we have more knowledge gaps in the community around mining. The average Bitcoiner can way better describe why, of an economic standpoint, it needs a decentralized currency like Bitcoin that is FU money. But they cannot, the average Bitcoiner cannot as good explain the mining process and what needs in mining and why we need a more decentralized mining network, why we need smaller miners, why templates, or like what even a template is. I think that's something that people don't know, like Ocean, what Ocean is doing and stuff like that. That's all really interesting concepts, but we need to close those gaps, I feel like.
I think I would say for any beginner that is listening to this, the most important thing that they need to know is that right now, once again, pools are the ones that build the blocks. Okay, and since they are the ones that build blocks, they are the ones that choose the transactions that go in them. And since there are only 6 or 7 major pools that represent the vast majority of hash rate, this means that these 6, 7 entities have right now the power to select what goes in those blocks. So censorship, in a sense, at least partially, is possible right now in Bitcoin. And what Stratum V2 brings to the table is that it transfers that power from the pools to the miners. Therefore, if the miners individually are the ones selecting transaction, are the ones building blocks, this censorship threat, gets eliminated basically. In a nutshell, that this is like the most important thing that people need to know. And of course, I would also add that since in Stratum V2, miners will build their own blocks, they of course need to run a node. So, and as I was saying right now, the vast majority of miners, I would say more than 90% for sure, they don't run a node. So they're not directly connected to the network. So what Stratum V2 is going to bring as well is that basically, hopefully, we're going to see a huge surge in Bitcoin nodes all over the world, which of course will help enhance the network's decentralization in the end of the day.
Absolutely, really cool. Is another thing also the miners itself, that we get more individual miners versus institutional miners that are just having huge farms. I like how Poppernet calls them like the rabbits versus the horses versus the elephants. I think he calls them. I don't know if how the big ones are called.
Yeah, I think it's important. Although we've seen with China ban that network is able to withstand, right? A huge drop in hash rate. But let's say if we're talking, let's talk about like the worst scenario of all. So let's say that 90% of the hash rate is on these public miners. What can happen is that if that's the case, the government has access, at least indirectly, to that hash rate, right? So in theory, they can like shut it off. And if that was the case, you would have like a 90% drop on the hash rate. So then until the difficulty adjustment kicks in, it would take not 2 weeks, it would take way much longer. So yeah, a lot of chaos could ensue if such a scenario happened. And what can we do to like prevent that, or at least to kind of like diminish the probability of such a scenario? Is of course to run as much BitAxes and home miners as possible, because it might not seem a lot, right, individually, but if we get a million, for instance, BitAxes, or yeah, 1 million terahashes, so it's a million terahashes, we're talking about 1 exahash, right? So it might not seem a lot, but it's if everyone does this, it might be important, right, for such a scenario, because let's say 800 exahashes right now, a 90% drop in the hash rate in the scenario that I was describing. So 1-2%, we're talking about at least like 3-4% of the hash rate in home miners that are, of course, not susceptible to this pressure from the U.S. government to do whatever they want them to do. So yeah, it's definitely important to keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, it's the.
I would just add that, of course, that what we end up relying on at the end of the day is, of course, the incentive structure, because what kind of like gives me a peace of mind that this scenario will not play out is that governments, they are, of course, motivated to contribute to the network and to actually to contribute with hash power and to mine as much as possible. So it's the game theory, right, aspect of it. So in a sense, Bitcoin is based on math, right? And math, energy, proof of work, physics. And then you have the incentive structure that makes sure that everyone keeps using their energy, their effort to contribute to the network rather than attacking it. And at the end of the day, that's what gives me the assurance, at least in theory, that such a scenario like that won't happen. Even, let's say, even in the case that there's like a huge amount of hash rate on public miners' hands.
That's super interesting. Of like the game theory of we need many smaller ones, because they are not as easy to kill. They're easy to kill, but like you cannot kill them all, like because there's so many, and like you need the mix of that.
And I think the best defense of the Bitcoin network itself is that every time that someone eventually thinks about attacking Bitcoin, they are never 100%. I mean, they are not 100% sure, of course, but they can never be assured that they will succeed. And they know that if they don't succeed, Bitcoin in that process will become stronger, right? Is the anti-fragility process that Nassim Taleb talks about. So that's like the big issue for anyone that wants to do harm to Bitcoin as well, because as time goes by, its resilience it increases, right? It has been increasing as for these past few years, right? Hash rate has gone through the roof, and it gets more and more difficult to do any kind of attack on Bitcoin. And beyond that, or moreover, you need to take into account as well the fact that if you fail to do that, Bitcoin will become even stronger, because it just got proven that Bitcoin is able to resist to attacks like yours.
Interesting. Do you think that Bitcoin at that point is over the point of no return, is over the point of inevitability? Like it's like almost impossible to kind of get it back in get it destroyed?
I think there's a lot of things that we have to be concerned about. This issue with pools creating block inputs is one of them. A lot of hash rate on public miners' hands is another one for sure. However, if you like, once again, if you take into account the incentives of all the participants in, let's say, the economic game, we kind of know that Bitcoin has reached a strength level that basically not even a government can bring it down. So because we're talking about like we're not in the physical space, right? We're in the cyberspace, and in the physical space, even if you have the biggest army in the world, you cannot do that. You cannot do anything about it. That's the magic of Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, and it makes me think about the implications of that. Like if we have the biggest force of Bitcoin, and it kind of goes into that, and it kind of forces itself onto all of the other things because game theory is so strong and the network effect is so strong. What kind of implications do you see coming in a world that was there 20 years ago, where this is kind of now there, and especially if Bitcoin becomes more and more mainstream and more adopted, what do you think is the implications of that?
I think what's going to play out is the sovereign individual thesis. I don't know if you read that book already, but once again, since both central banks and governments are incentivized to survive, right? They will eventually buy Bitcoin, right? They will bend the knee, of course, and they'll say, "All right, you managed to take the power of money out of our hands, but we want to remain at least with as the most amount of power possible." And there will come a day where they will say, "All right, I'll just buy Bitcoin in order to achieve that goal that I have." Um, so I think we will live in a world with smaller states. You will have a lot of city states, for instance, those regions that have been fighting for independence, such as Catalonia. I don't know. Is that the correct term in English? Yeah, Catalonia.
I
No,
think I at least know
Catalonia.
what you know, but
Yeah, it's
maybe so.
Barcelona basically. Um, but yeah, you have also that area on the north of Belgium. I forgot its name. So all those regions, I think, eventually in the next like 30 to 40 years, will manage to gain their independence, and there will be more competition between governments, between states, and people will start looking at them more like service providers rather than these the behemoth that everyone needs just to comply and do whatever they want.
I do think so. I hope so. What do you think is will the EU then necessarily fail, like a
I think
concept?
I think so. It's inevitable. It's kind of sad in one end because it was the European Union that brought peace, right, to our continent. It's kind of painful to see it go away, but we know that the way things are structured right now, it's basically unsustainable. We have very different people, very different cultures, different views of doing things, and although of course we are Europeans, we are brothers, but yeah, that doesn't mean, of course, that we need to have like this big union with all this bureaucracy and that everyone is doing like the same thing. And I think it's inevitable that in the next few decades, the European Union will just disintegrate itself.
I love how Elon said it recently. We don't live in a democracy; we live in a bureaucracy.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is what it is.
How do you
But
look at things like Doge? Obviously, not the coin, the government program of like cutting government spending and bringing maybe even like a little bit more liberal force into that.
I think it's great. For me, I'm a Hayek guy. Once again, I'm reading Murray Rothbard, and whatever actions put more monies in people's pockets, the better at the end of the day. Because the smaller the government, the smaller the pot that everyone is just incentivized to try to get their hands on, right? So it's a fairer system in the end of the day. with less taxes, because what the government does in today's world is just playing this role of God, right? Because you had like some voluntary interactions between all members in society. Someone provided value, they got this wealth as a reward for it, right? And then the government is saying no, because in my view, in a view that of course is subjective, no, you don't deserve that amount of wealth. Someone else deserves it because I don't know, they did they were not born in a certain condition. But of course, that's a subjective opinion, right? It's nothing objective. So you cannot put things like that, right? And of course, what ends up happening in such a society is that people, in the end of the day, become less incentivized in order to produce wealth, in order to provide value to others, and they become more incentivized to just come as close as possible to the government to get that money that the government collects from the private sector and from the wealth creators. But if that happens, of course, wealth stops being produced, and then in the end of the day, is everyone ends up in poverty, right?
And that's a socialist dream of everyone is going to be poor. That's where it's
I
gonna
don't think
end up.
I don't think they think right. They think that at the end of the day, regardless of your economic views or your political views, you just want everyone to live a good life. At least that's what I believe. The issue is that, of course, there's a in terms of education, there's a huge gap for in the vast majority of the population in today's world, and people cannot think critically about things. And of course, that when you have an educated population, you as a government, you can do whatever you want. And I would argue that besides, of course, that the power over money is the most important power that you can have on a society. But after that, definitely the monopoly on education is definitely the second most important one for sure. Because if you manage to get people thinking that, all right, this is the way to go, and this is the thing that we need to do, and it cannot be the other way around, and there's no other way to do it, and it's then it gets very very tricky. um yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. We talked about a lot of topics today, actually, but I have one question that I asked each and every one of my guests, and the question is, what can we learn from you besides Bitcoin?
What can Oh, that's a good question. I wasn't expecting, but I mean, I would say that on a more philosophical lens, just yeah, remember that in the end of the day, there's a famous quote by Confucius that says you have two lives. The second one starts when you understand that you only have one. So of course that Bitcoin is finite, but at the end of the day, your time is really the most precious asset that you have. So just don't waste it on stupid things. Just to be sure that you take advantage of like every moment in your life, and don't take today for granted, or tomorrow or whatever. Just of course that you need some balance. You cannot live like today is your last day in the world, right? Because if that was the case, probably you would sell all your Bitcoin, and you would you would take advantage of it on these last on your last 24 hours. But just try to have that presence, like the fact that we are mortal beings, that life goes fast, and enjoy it as much as you can, and have that in mind always.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very true. I love the quote of like, you have two lives, and the second one starts once you realize you only have one. That's a that's a heck of
Yeah,
a
you never heard that?
thing on. I never heard that actually. Yeah, it's a really good one. I like it. Really
Yeah.
cool. Perfect. Then we have an end routine in the podcast where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And your question from the previous guest is, what year will the hyper Bitcoinization be?
That's a tough question. So I would put my money on probably in like 30 years. So 2055, something like that. Yeah, 2025,
Nice.
20, so 2025, 2055, yeah. So 30 years, 2055.
Nice. Very conservative.
My question, right?
Really
Need to
cool.
think about it.
Yeah, like the question, you can think a little bit more about because I usually just put it offline. But if you have already one, you can scream it out. But you have more time to think about the question for the next guest. Yeah, thank you so much, Francisco, for being on the show. It was really great to have
Okay.
you. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
Yeah, the easiest way to reach out to me is through my Twitter. I can send my link. I'm at Shiku Durden21, and feel free to DM me if you have any questions about like these Stratum V2 things, like what's going on mining, or anything else for that matter. Actually, just yeah, feel free to shoot me a message.
Really cool. Thank you so much, Francisco, for being on. Also, thank you so much. Thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. Bye bye.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Robin.